It's fair to say that we can expect a variety of drawing tools from Illustrator, because essentially it is a vector drawing application. In this chapter, I'm going to focus on the different types of drawing techniques, starting in this video with the basic drawing tools. One of the most essential and most simple drawing tool is the pencil tool. The shortcut for it is N, and once it's selected, with this you can draw lines. By default, this tool will only use a black outline, so the stroke is set to 1 point and black color, and there won't be any fill whenever you draw with this tool. I am using a Wacom tablet, and that is why you will see that my lines are a little bit more fluid and more dynamic, while if I try to repeat the same thing with the mouse, you will see that I'm not as good as before. Now, luckily, Illustrator offers a lot of different ways of improving your line work, even if you are using a mouse. So when it comes to freehand drawing, the pencil tool is one of the most useful tools that you can work with, especially because it has a couple of features that comes in very handy while drawing. So let me just delete these few lines here, and I am going to show you when we draw with this tool. It offers some preferences which you can get to by double-clicking on the tool itself. Once you do that, you will see in the pencil tool options a few important settings like keep selected and edit selected paths. I already mentioned this in a previous video, but I would like to stress that this is very useful if you keep these on. Now, what it means is that when you are drawing a line, and you decide that you would like to continue that line, you have to be close when you continue drawing, but as long as it's close to the previous line, Illustrator will understand that you would like to continue that previous line that you started. Not only that, but you can also redraw sections of your line. As you can see, I can go over parts, and I can even completely change the way I lead this line. I could even add a note here, for example. So both continuing and redrawing you can do with the pencil tool. And of course, while you are drawing, you can change its attributes like the stroke size or weight and even the color, of course. So once I change that, I can still continue drawing with this, but now with the new attributes. In the Creative Cloud version, you also have an additional option called Option Key Toggles to Smooth Tool. If I turn that on, I can try it holding down the Alt key. I can switch to the Smooth tool, which is not going to redraw these lines, but it's going to simplify them. So it's going to try to make the lines a little bit more smooth and continuous. As you can see, by drawing over a couple of times with the Smooth tool, I can simplify and make it a little bit even more fluid. It is important to remember that you need to have the path selected to be able to continue drawing it. So when I use the pencil tool, you can see currently it's selected and I can continue drawing it. But if I hold down the Command key or Control key and click somewhere outside, then when I go close to it, the little star next to the cursor tells me that it's going to start drawing a new line. So although it was very close, it is still not connected. Another technique that you can do with the pencil tool is to be able to draw straight lines. So I'm drawing freely, but if I hold down the Alt or Option key, I can start drawing straight line segments. Now it's important that don't let go the mouse or the pen while you are doing that. If you want to create a straight line segment, let the Alt or Option key go, and then you can continue drawing again freely. Once again, holding down the Alt, I can have a straight line segment. And then when I let the Alt or Option key go, I can continue again drawing. So this is how you can temporarily switch to straight line segment drawing mode with the pencil tool. When we go back to options, we can also see a fidelity slider, which can be set to accurate or smooth. Notice that I had it in the middle, so I like to keep it there, but let me just show you what does it mean. When it's set to accurate, when I draw, it's going to follow my line as close as possible. If I do something very similar to this, but setting it to smooth, when I draw something similar, you can see it's much smoother. So it's not going to follow my line as closely, Instead, it's going to try to smooth my lines out. As I said, I prefer to keep this slider in the middle. And I also like to use this option most of the time called close paths when ends are within. And I normally type in 10 pixels for this. So that means I don't even have to worry about closing my paths because it will automatically do it for me. So when I get close to the beginning point, it's going to close it up for me. Now let me just make some space here on the right. So let's try this again. And when the little circle appears on the cursor, it means it's going to automatically close the path for me. Now, of course, when it's a closed path, I can still redraw sections of it if I want to. And I can still hold down the Alt key to smooth the lines out. So as you can see, we could create a nice, almost elliptical shape very quickly. Another interesting technique that you can use to make your drawings a little bit nicer is the simplify option. So it's almost like using the smooth tool, but it's more controlled from a general setting. It's under the object menu, path, simplify, where the feature is. Once you click on this, it's going to give you an option how you want to simplify this shape. So we can preview it. And we can see with the curve precision increased, it's going to be closer to the original, or when it's decreased, it's going to be much further away from the original shape. We can even show the original shape together. So that was before, and this is after. And I can also see that it originally had 11 points. Now it has 5 points. And these are called anchor points. So while you are drawing, Illustrator automatically generates these anchor points, which are providing the structure for your paths. Interestingly enough, you can also turn them into straight lines. So the simplify feature can convert curved lines into straight lines as well. That's very useful to remember. We'll come back to this later as well. But for now, I'm just going to click OK. And let's just try this on a more complex path. So I'm intentionally going to draw something much more complex, like that. And now if I go back to Object, Path, Simplify, it's worth assigning a custom shortcut to this if you use it often. But now that I selected it, I can see, if I turn off the straight lines, from 44 points, I can actually get down to 13 points. And I can turn off the show original and maybe just turn the preview on and off just to see before and after how it's simplifying my path. And once again, I could even turn them all into straight lines, but I'm going to keep it curved for now and I will click OK. And this is all you really need to know about the pencil tool. But in this video, I would like to also introduce another tool which is very similar to this, and that is the paintbrush tool. The shortcut for that is B, and it's quite convenient that the shortcuts are next to each other on the keyboard. So N is for the pencil, B is for the brush tool. And this paintbrush, when I start drawing with it, will look almost exactly the same and work exactly the same as the pencil tool, with one major difference. This is actually, by default, is using a calligraphic brush instead of a basic brush. And what that means is that you can actually see a live feedback while you are drawing, while with the pencil tool, when I switch back to it, you only see a path, and then it's going to generate the line along that path once you let go. Of course, with the brush tool, you can also make changes to the settings. If I double click on it, like using the keep selected option and the edit selected paths options, we can continue drawing currently selected paths. So I can continue drawing this, and I can also refine sections of it or completely change it, just like with the pencil tool. If I want to draw a closed shape with this, I have to hold down the Alt key when I get close to the end point. And if I want to draw straight lines, I have to hold down the Shift key. But this is important that you have to hold down the Shift key before you start drawing. And once you started drawing, you won't be able to change direction. So it will be restricted to continue drawing in that direction. You can draw diagonal lines with it as well, but it's restricted to these directions. So vertical, horizontal, diagonal, when you are holding down the Shift key with the paintbrush tool. So now that we learned these basic techniques, in the next video, I'm going to show you how I would draw over these sunglasses and get to a similar looking drawing to those on the top left side of the artboard. Now that we are familiar with the two essential tools, the pencil and the brush tool, I am going to now attempt to draw over these sunglasses. You have the same file, so you can practice with me, and make sure that you select the drawing layer when you do this, because that's the only available layer, the others are locked. We will learn later how to place in images into documents and paint over them or trace manually over them, but for now let's just stick to this example. I am going to use the paintbrush and set the stroke size to 0.25. That way I can draw much thinner lines. I will make sure that the keep selected and edit selected paths are both on. And I'm going to use intentionally a different color than the colors of the image in the background. So like this red one will work quite nicely. It will stand out. Now, where to start is completely up to you. I'm going to zoom closer so I can paint these lines nice and smoothly. And it's good to remember not to draw too close. So not to zoom too close, because that can also make it difficult to follow along the lines. You can see the way I draw is that I try to draw smaller sections, and whenever I feel like I need to improve some of my lines, I go back and redraw them. Like here as well, again, I'm not happy with that line, so I come back and redraw it. Don't waste too much time on sections like that. You can always come back later and refine it. So instead, I'm just going to carry on drawing further these parts. And all this is going to be one long section or one line. When I get here, I'm intentionally going to finish my line going up, and I will also do the same thing here at the other end. You will see why I'm doing this. This is just a personal preference, but you will see what's the advantage in this later. Again, I'm just going to try to refine that section there, but I can also hold down the Alt key and draw over that part, which will give me the smooth tool. Now for the next line, I am going to concentrate on the top part of this section. So I will start a new line, and you can see I started it from the outside, and I try to draw in a very dynamic line instead of drawing small sections, and I just redraw parts that I'm not happy with. That's quite nice line work. Now we will obviously have to draw the inside as well, so I'm just going to draw over these parts here. And once again, I try to be more dynamic and not worrying about small details, because we can always refine them later. That looks good. Now this one needs to go further up like that, and then come down, something like that. Let's continue drawing around. That's all right. Now we can also draw this line here in the background, so let me just start drawing it and then continue. This is going to give the depth for our shades. That's it. We go up and then finish our line there. Now again, we can refine it here if we want to. I can also use the smooth tool, and that will work. Okay, now we can draw the other line here. When a line is very straight, you can even cheat. Holding down the shift key, you can draw a straight line, and then you can just move it into position and use the rotate option. Now there is the rotate tool. You can select that and click on the point which you want to maintain, and then the rest of this shape is going to rotate around that point. Now it's nicely placed there, and we can even duplicate this. Holding down the Alt key, we can copy paste it onto the other side, and even this bottom line here can be used. Maybe again using the rotate tool. By pressing R, you can very quickly switch to the rotate tool, select the point which you keep in the original position, and there's the line. Now you can switch back to the brush tool and continue drawing from that section that you created, and then you can finish the line the way you want. And then again, I hold down the Command key or Control key to select another line. Again, continue drawing that. Once again, try to finish it, do the same thing with the other one, finish it up there, and then we can also draw another line just to close it off. And then we need one more line, so I'm just going to draw that additional line like that. Now, why did I draw these sections in such a messy way? You will see at the end. So let's just quickly finish this off. I'm going to now start drawing from here. And I'm not even going to bother about the straight line in this case. I just draw it very quickly. There's one. I could even continue in the other way. This shape can be all in one line, because I can see the whole section like that. And then the next line, I will start from here and draw it. If you are drawing the opposite direction, sometimes your hand might not work as precisely as it would in the other direction. So you might want to switch directions if you ever feel like it's not following it the way you wanted. And then once again, holding down the Alt key, I can refine that slightly. Now, let's have a look. So we have the majority of the lines in place already. Probably the messiest part is this here. So we might need to work a little bit more on that. But what I am going to do now is to use a feature that we used previously, the shape builder. But before I switch to that, make sure I select all the lines together. Then we can zoom a bit closer. And now comes the shape builder. Remember, that's Shift M if you want to quickly select it. And then hold down the Alt key. I can very quickly get rid of all those lines that I don't need. So these overlapping lines we won't need. We don't need that one. We don't need this one. And then we can go all the way up here. We won't need this line. We don't need these. You can even draw over the parts that you don't need. There's a little bit left there. That looks much better now. And we can do exactly the same thing here. Just remove the ones that you don't need. Again, Alt click on these one by one, or you can just also hold down Alt and draw over all the sections that you don't need. And then I think that it is it. Maybe that one there needs to be deleted as well. Now, this is one of the many ways you can draw in Illustrator. And let's see the drawing without the image in the background. Now, if you find any parts that you don't like this one here, I'm not entirely sure why it ended up looking like that. And if I'm not happy about the line, I can also just delete it and use again the brush tool and just draw another line that looks better. Okay, I just simplified it a bit. That looks still fine. And the only thing missing is the three-dimensional aspect of the actual glass parts. So I'm going to use the brush tool again, and I will draw over these parts here now, just using my imagination. I don't even need the reference anymore, like that. And once again, to make sure that these lines all match up, I'm going to use the shape builder, select everything, hold down Alt, and just quickly get rid of those overlapping parts. I intentionally drew those overlapping elements so I can see that it's completely matching and all the lines are closed. Now still, of course, I can always select parts of it, and if I'm not happy how it looks, I can redraw it. So that's the amazing thing about Illustrator, that it's very easy to do that. And I could even select the whole thing all together and go into the Object, Path, Simplify option, which might not work perfectly in some cases. So you might want to be a bit careful with it. And instead of going all the way down, that might mess up the drawing, but it can also create a quite abstract result. I'm going to keep it around 80%. Let's just see how that looks. Okay, some parts looks better, some parts are actually worse than before. But yeah, it nicely improved sections of it. So I'm going to actually accept this and I'll click OK. You see I use 91%, so it's quite close to the original, but there is quite a big difference in the amount of anchor points. I used 148 in my drawing, but Illustrator managed to simplify it down to 75 points. Now, less anchor points is most of the time an advantage. So you might want to use this simplify more often if you've never used it before. And I'm going to change the color of my outlines to black. Now we achieved a quite nice line work, but there's another great technique that I use normally to create a thicker outline. So once I have my object, I want to have an outline, and I'm going to do that quickly here. So I select the whole shape, and I intentionally do this on the side, so I copy it, holding down Alt, click and drag. And once we have our copy, there's actually many different ways of doing this, but we need to fill this in completely. Now, I prefer to use this tool called Live Paint Bucket. So I'm going to select that. K is the shortcut, and you can use the arrows on the keyboard to switch between colors. I will intentionally use something different like a red color, and I'm going to zoom closer, and I am going to click in these sections. I can even just quickly click and drag over the sections, all of them, and paint everything red or whatever color you used. So that's completely filled in the shape that we created. Now that it's created, have it selected and then click on Expand here on the top, which turns these all into normal shapes. And then switch to the Shape Builder tool and paint over or join together the areas which you want to keep as the outlines. Now avoid this central part here, because that's going to be necessary to get the lines right. I'm going to paint over everything. And now that it's filled in, we can also assign an outline or stroke, and we can increase that stroke size, let's say up to something stronger like 3 points, and we can set it to align the stroke outside. Now we can even remove the fill color and just simply move this whole thing back here onto our original drawing, so align it to that. And apart from a couple of problems around here, it looks quite good already. Select this group that I just created, double click on it, and then zoom closer, so I can use direct selection tool or the lasso tool and make a selection of that part there, delete all those points. I can also do the same thing here, delete them, and that's the majority that was visible. So now I can just double click again outside, and we have a nice outline. So this is without the strong outline, and this is with it. Now, of course, this outline can always be amended. So if I feel like it's too strong, I can reduce it a bit. And then last but not least, we can draw a little bit of shading on the glasses or like a reflection by using again the brush tool. But for this, make sure you double click on it and turn off the keep selected and edit selected paths. Otherwise, it's going to redraw the lines when you draw them too close to each other. So I can start drawing the lines, and it's like a bit of a shading that we add on this section here. You can always have the lines a little bit closer. And don't forget, we can also delete the ones that go too far. So I will go over this section again. All I'm just trying to do is to keep the lines diagonal going the same direction, like that. And as I said, if there's anything that went too far, we can select all these lines together and use the Shape Builder tool to remove the overhanging parts. If I zoom out, you can see that the style is now very similar to the other illustrations. So don't forget to select the whole illustration, group it together, and then it will be easy to select it. So remember, press Command G or Control G to do that. Now I can also make it smaller or bigger. Just remember that for this you need the scale, strokes and effects option on. Otherwise the stroke size will be messed up if you don't use that. I'm just going to increase it up, maybe turn it around a bit, and there's the shades that we created. And it fits nicely in this collection, I think. At the end of this chapter, I'm going to give you more exercises where you can practice using the pencil and the brush tool and all these techniques that I went through in this video. But now it's time in the next video to look at some other special drawing tools. Now that we know how the pencil tool works, and we also know how the brush tool works, it's time to introduce another tool called the blob brush tool. Now this tool is also here in the toolbar together with the paintbrush. The shortcut for it is not B, it's Shift B. And the main difference is that this tool actually has a brush size. Now, when you double click on the tool, it has additional options, but we can already see that there is a size for the brush. I'm going to increase this. And by the way, you can see because I'm using a tablet, it's already set up to control the size with the pressure that I'm using on the tablet itself. So the harder I press the pen, the bigger the brush gets. Of course, I can always switch back to fixed size, which means it's going to be the same size always, but I'm going to keep it on pressure. I will come back to this and explain it in more detail, but for now, let's just see how this works. So as you can see, it has a brush size, and when I paint, the main difference here is not just that I have a very big brush, but also that the resulting object is actually a filled shape. So it's not a path that follows the direction in which I drew, but it actually creates a blob, which is a filled object. So while the brush tool and also the pencil will draw with a stroke, the blob brush draws a fill. Let me just change the color of these objects so we can see the difference better. I'm going to turn this also yellow. And now if I select one of these paths, you can see the anchor points on it, or we can see it also on this path. So the lines are following the anchor points, while on this shape, the anchor points are all around the shape and not in the middle. So that is already a big difference. But let me show you one additional thing as well that you need to remember with the blob brush. That is that you can change the size of it by using the square brackets on the keyboard. You can even press and hold them down to increase and decrease the size. And when you draw a line and you continue drawing and overlapping the previous shape, these two will become one joined shape automatically, as long as the color is the same. If you draw somewhere else and not connect the two shapes, then obviously it will be two separate objects. So that's one, there's another one. And if I deselect this shape as well and just use a different color and paint over these, because it is a different color, of course, it's not going to be automatically connected into the other shapes. Now you are probably wondering, why is it important to have a tool like this? Well, for me, in my workflow, this serves mainly for coloring. So this is a great tool to color very quickly details, and I'm going to show it to you here on this hat. First of all, I'm going to lock it. There's a shortcut. If you press Command 2 or Control 2 on PC, that's a quick way to lock the selected object. Then I'm going to select the blob brush and pick a color. I'm going to use maybe orange color for this, or red, and that's going to be the main fill color for this shape. But before I draw, I will also do something else. As you can see, currently it's actually painting on top of the hat, but what I want to do is to paint behind it. Now, what you can do in Illustrator is to change drawing modes, and you will find an option called Draw Behind here at the bottom of the toolbar. The shortcut for it is Shift D. With that, you can actually toggle between Draw Normal, which would mean draw in front, and then Shift D switches to Draw Behind, which means when you draw, it automatically will appear behind whatever you have on the current layer. As long as this mode is selected, you will be able to draw and create shapes at the bottom of the current layer. So that is a great technique for coloring. You can see already that when I go over this shape, everything is going to appear behind it. Of course, I could make my brush bigger, but I quite like painting over and just quickly achieve what I wanted. Now, you can, of course, then switch color, and I'm going to pick yellow, let's just say, for this ribbon part here. So I'm going to paint over that. Once again, just very quickly, those areas, paint over it with yellow. Now, what happened there is that because the draw behind was still on, the new shape was actually created all the way at the bottom behind the red item. Of course, I can always go to the layers panel and drag that group above the red object, but it's also good to remember that you can always switch between drawing modes. And if you use draw behind often, then it might be wise to start with smaller details first and then draw the bigger areas. That way you don't even have to go to the layers to move things around. Now you might be thinking that this looks really sloppy and there's a lot of parts that goes outside of the hat, but what you can do, as always, is to unlock the hat, select all these details together, and then use our trusty shape builder, holding down Alt or Option, and very quickly remove all the unnecessary details. Now, for the yellow bits, I'm going to lock temporarily the red parts, and then I select again the hat, which has the outlines and that yellow bit, and then again use the shape builder tool, hold down Alt, and remove quickly those parts that we don't need. And to make it even faster, I will show you another great technique. For erasing, what we can also do is to select this yellow shape. I will just zoom a little bit closer just so you can see it better, and then select the eraser tool, which is Shift E, or it's here on the toolbar. And the good thing about this tool is that it works exactly like the blob brush. It even has size options, just like the blob brush, but instead of drawing, it erases. So we can change the brush size just like with the blob brush. And the best thing about it is that it only deletes from the selected shape. So because I have that yellow shape selected, I can quickly remove the parts that I don't need and keep the parts that I wanted to use in this design. So that was a quick way of coloring, but of course there's other ways of coloring as well. And once I show this to you, you might feel like, why didn't you just use this in the first place? Well, you have to get used to that in Adobe applications, and it applies to Illustrator as well. There are many different ways of doing the same thing. And that's exactly because every artist prefers to do things in their own way. And if you know different techniques to achieve the same result, you will always have the option to decide which one works best in that current artwork that you are working on. So let me show you this quickly. I'm going to select this, copy it, and I will also quickly delete the colors from it. So that's that. I will just move everything slightly to the left. So now that I have a duplicate here, I'm going to have this selected. And remember I showed you this in the previous video, the Live Paint Bucket tool. With this one, I can fill in colors. Once again, I just need to select the colors I wish to use. And all I need to do is to click on the area which I want to fill in with that color. Now it works really quickly and very nicely. We can use the left and right arrows to switch between colors from our swatches. And as you can see, very quickly I can get to an almost exact result that we have on the left side, apart from that few little details here. And that is where the blob brush was actually more effective, because to go through these with the paint bucket, I would have to click on each section one by one. And you might still think that this is faster, but when you have a lot of tiny details, this tool might not be the best way to colorize your drawings. And you have to be careful not to click on the stroke, because even the strokes can be colorized with this tool. So when it's tiny details like these, you have to really zoom close to be able to cover those parts as well with paint. Now, if we look at it from a distance, it looks great, but the best way would have been to combine the two techniques. And that's another very important concept to understand. To combine tools is usually the best and most efficient way of working. How you combine tools and in what order you use them is up to you. As long as you combine them, you usually will be more effective working with Illustrator. So let me just go back a few steps until I get to that point where I started to be struggling with the Live Paint bucket. Up to this point, it was easy. We just clicked on the big areas. But that's when I would switch to the blob brush tool, zoom closer, click somewhere outside to make sure I deselect this, and then select the blob brush tool. It has the same color still highlighted. I can make my brush smaller, And to make sure that I can paint behind this, I'm going to lock that group in which I have the hat, and I'm going to start painting. You see, because we still have the paint behind option enabled, it just goes nicely behind it, and I can very quickly fill in these spaces much faster than struggling with the live paint feature. There you go. Now we can zoom out, and you see again a combination of two different tools allowed us to work much faster. So to summarize, what we learned is that the blob brush tool is great for coloring, but we can also use it in combination with the live paint bucket tool. And don't forget that you can also change the drawing mode to draw behind instead of draw normal and paint things in front of the existing shapes. Another tool that we used here in this video was the eraser tool, which is very similar to the blob brush tool, with which we can erase along a line that we draw. So just wanted to show you how effective it can be on drawings. And to finish this video with a shortcut, if you hold down the Alt key while using the eraser tool, you can actually erase along a selection. So you can crop an illustration, for example, very quickly and keep only a portion of it. In the next video, we will look at a couple of additional tools, which I usually call assistance tools or assistance drawing tools, because they are not the main tools for drawing, but they can be very useful to refine and combine your existing lines. In this video, I will talk about the tools that I call drawing assistance tools. And the reason I call them that is because they can't really draw on their own, but they can really help to improve whatever you drew already with the paintbrush or the pencil tools, or even with the pen tool that we will talk about in more detail later on. But let me show you first of all my favorite, the join tool. Now this is only available in Creative Cloud, unfortunately, but I will give you another technique that is almost the same, slightly longer, but will still give you the same result almost. But for those who have Creative Cloud, just select the join tool, and with this tool, if you need to connect lines, you just have to draw over them and it will connect them and also nicely smooth out the gaps. Now, depending how far these lines are from each other, this might work or this might not work, and also depending how close you draw over these lines. Now you can see already here, I found a gap which I can't join together, and I think it's going to be the same here as well. Yes, it's not going to join. While this one seemed like a bigger gap, it still manages to connect it, and even that one there. I want to just go back one step here and notice that although these 2 points could be connected with a straight line, it tries to follow the original lines, and that's what's amazing about the join tool, that it predicts how these lines would meet. So although it doesn't connect everything when you have some big gaps, it might not work on them. On the gaps that it works, it does an amazing job. And when I switch to outline view, which is Command or Control Y, we can see it is actually one connected shape. And we can even see the anchor points there. Now switching back to normal view with the same shortcut, I am going to show you what you can do in case you are using this tool, the join tool, and you encounter these tricky areas. What you can do first of all is select the white arrow tool, the direct selection tool, and just drag one of those points slightly closer. And now it has to work, yes, as I expected. Now that we fixed one of the gaps, it actually managed to finish the other corner as well. Let me go back a few steps and show you what happens if I use on these gaps the other technique, which is available in previous versions as well. So what you need to do is to select both endpoints, either with the direct selection tool or the lasso tool. And once they are selected, here in the options bar, you will find this option called Connect Selected Endpoints. When I click on that, you will see it generated the bridge between those two, so it connected them, and it will work really nicely everywhere. The only difference with this to the join tool is, it's especially visible here in the corner, is that it's going to just do a straight line. So the fastest and shortest way to get from one point to another. That might not be the best looking connection. So after that, you can always switch to other tools like the smooth tool and just paint over it slightly to smooth out those parts. It's almost like ironing out the creases. So you can always do this afterwards. And also here's another great tool. If you have a point selected which is curved, you can also turn that into a corner point. Up here again in the option bar where you have the direct selection tool, you will be able to switch between corner point and curve point. Now you have to make sure that you select completely the point that you wish to turn into a corner point, and that way you see now we have a completely sharp corner at the bottom. We could do the same thing here on the top as well, turn that into a sharp corner. So this is what happens when you join an object together, and now selecting it we can press Shift X to swap the color, and now it's used for the fill of this object. But here's another tool that is useful to learn, and that is the scissors tool. Now with this one you can be very precise and cut a shape into two. So let's just say I want to cut it here and then here. You see I added 2 points and now this shape is cut into two. The difference between this tool and the eraser tool is that while the eraser tool cuts while deleting a portion, the scissors tool actually kept both sides completely perfect, and I would be able to move it back exactly the way it was if I wanted to. Now here's another interesting tool. I'm just going to draw a line with the pencil tool, and I will increase the stroke size slightly on this. Then I switch to the path eraser tool, and with this tool you can erase the endpoints, or you can also erase sections inside the line. So I can very quickly erase different lengths as well if I want to. And although you have the dash line option for strokes, this could still be useful in some cases. And last but not least, there's another tool that can also be used to divide objects. This is called the knife tool. I like to think of it as the samurai sword of Illustrator, because essentially what it does is that you have an object, let's say this hat here, and you want to cut it in half, but without losing any details. Now we've seen the scissors tool, which works fine on a simple object, but on a more complex object, which has a lot of details in it, you can use the knife as if you were using a sword and cut it into half. And then what I like to do is to switch to the outline view, which is Control or Command Y, then press Q to get the lasso tool, zoom a little bit closer, and try to make a selection of the half which you would like to select. Just like that. Then I press Command G to separate it, and now we can move it apart and see how we managed to cut it into two sections. So all these tools can be very useful when it comes to refining your drawing, but normally I use these tools while I'm drawing, so it's not like two separate stages. I constantly switch back and forth between these tools. Under the window menu, within Tools, you will be able to create a new Tools panel. I'm just going to call this Drawing Tools. And you can see it created an additional toolbar on which I can drag and drop all the tools I wish to work with. I would start with the pencil tool, so I drag and drop that there. Then I'm going to drop the paintbrush just underneath it. Then I'm going to put the blob brush in there as well. Then I will need the eraser tool. And then we can switch to the more specialized tools like the smooth tool, then also the join tool. And let's not forget about the shape builder tool. I almost always use this tool in every workflow, so I like to keep it available and handy. Now we can still switch into a 2-column mode or keep it 1 column. When you don't need your tool panel anymore, you can just close it. But whenever you need it, you can just go back and find it, and there you go. It remembered exactly the tools that we saved. Now don't forget, you can also customize the shortcuts. So for example, if you don't like the blob brush being Shift B, you can always customize its shortcut by going to Edit, keyboard shortcuts, and then from there under tools you will be able to find each of the tools. So blob brush should be here, Shift B, we can always replace it with something else. Now that we discussed these tools, it's time to learn about another drawing technique when you can draw inside existing shapes. So that's what I will show you in the next video. We already seen the draw normal and draw behind, but there's a third mode which is normally not available. You can see it here. And remember, Shift D is the shortcut to switch between the drawing modes. Now let me show you how it works. First of all, you need a container, an object in which you will be able to draw. Once something is selected, you can switch to draw inside. And the way you can tell that you are in this mode is that you see those little dashed lines at the corners of your selection. Then we can switch to the brush tool and we can start drawing. And the great thing about this mode is that whatever you draw will only be visible within your current selection. So if I just go back a few steps, I could even draw in a spiral and it will only be visible within the selection. If I want to draw zigzag lines, even that one will be contained within our current object. Now the interesting thing about this is that this technique creates a clipping group. When we go to the layers panel, we can see exactly what that means. That we will have this ellipse, the original shape, which is underlined, meaning that is the container or the clipping mask. And if I turn that off, we actually see my line. So all those parts outside are still there, they are just not visible. And as long as the container is turned on, it's going to hide all those parts that are outside of the object. Now let me go back a few steps and let's try to put this mode to use. Just to keep with the same theme that we already have here, I'm going to draw a beach ball. Let's start here on the top. I hold down the Alt key, then I can close it up into one circle. And then let's draw the next line, which is going to be something like that. Then another line, another one. Can go this way, that way, and then try to curve this one down. Now don't forget that you can also use the blob brush tool while being in draw inside mode. So let me just switch to that tool and I'm going to switch to a color like red, and I'm going to increase the size of the brush by holding down the square bracket. And now if I draw, once again, it's going to be kept within the same shape, and I just have to move it underneath the other lines. I can then also change the color or fill color of that shape in the middle. Just add, I don't know, white as the fill color, or maybe orange, and make sure it's all the way at the top of this shape. That way all the other lines are not going to affect it. If I now want to change the colors quickly, I will have to exit the draw inside mode, and we will need to use live paint for that. But to be able to use that, you will have to get rid of the clipping. The easiest way to do that is to have the whole object selected, and from the Pathfinder panel, you can choose this option called Divide. Once you click on it, it might mess up the strokes, but they can always be improved. So we can just go here, select black as the stroke, increase the size of it slightly, and maybe this object here on the top, this can be reduced. And then all we need to do is now select the whole object and use Live Paint Bucket, and then click on the areas which we wanted to colorize. But here's another important thing about the Live Paint, that when you have gaps like this one here, it might not recognize that this is two separate objects, and it will colorize both sections. You can actually notice when you are affecting two big areas by seeing that red outline, which covers both sides of this area here, already warns us that it's going to do too much. But the good thing is that under the Object Live Paint Gap Options, you can actually increase the gap size. And let's just increase it up to large, and I will click OK. And now you can see it recognizes that gap and ignores the fact that it doesn't go all the way, and I can still colorize only one section of it. I'm not saying the draw inside mode is crucial and it's something that you will use all the time, but it can definitely speed up the way you work and make it easier to contain lines within certain shapes. And just to give you another example, I could even draw the cast shadow the same way. I will just draw a circle here. Let's just say that's going to be the shadow. I move it behind the ball and I will remove the fill color from it. Just keep a stroke color, or maybe even not the stroke color. We can even remove that. But then I switch to draw inside, select the brush tool. And now all we need to do is to paint over this area here. When I'm close, I try to keep it tighter and then fade out slowly like that. And it actually looks quite nice, like a sketchy cast shadow. And I can always decide to remove the stroke from the outline. That way we only see the actual paint. And again, because that line was created with the brush tool, I can also reduce the thickness of it if I feel like it's too strong. And if I wanted, I could go over it again and add a little bit more shading here closer to the ball. So that was just another quick example of how to work with the draw inside technique. But after seeing all these different ways of drawing, we still haven't talked about one of the most important techniques, and that is the precision drawing with the pen tool. So that's what the next video is going to be about.